All right, welcome to tutorial 4, lesson 2. Now, in the last lesson, lesson 1, we just basically ran the code generation and walked through the different states of like a simple Mario kind of state machine here. But now let's close that and let's head over to lesson 2. So we'll open it up over here. And in a second, we'll open up our terminal. So basically, we are going to, just for fun, make a laser flashlight, which I like to think of as a poorly ergonomically designed lightsaber. We can take a quick peek at it here, actually. So this is kind of the demo that we're building. You can see kind of like some pulsing particles to make it look a little bit cooler, so it's not quite the always boring lights simulation. Right, so press ink, we get to the yellow one. Press ink 3 times, you can see the count growing down there. We get to the red one, and after a certain amount of time, the red one will shut off. There it goes. All right, so let's go back to the tutorial here, and we're basically gonna follow along here. And yeah, so let's go ahead and open up our terminal. We got a terminal here. I'm going to change into lesson 2. We'll list the files here, and like it says, because we already have a state machine here that does what we want, but we want to recreate it from scratch just to show, the process. So let's go ahead and remove light star. Did that work? Looks like it worked. Okay, so we deleted all the files there, and now we're gonna go ahead and create them all. So create a new draw.io file. We're gonna follow the steps here. We're gonna ss.cli create. The only important part here is that for our generated state machine to link up with the index.html file that does the simulation, we need to name it appropriately. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to pick the user-friendly workflow. Here's the important part. Name it properly. We're going to go with JavaScript because that's what our demo is working in. And we're going to go with draw.io XML. We're going to accept all of the rest here, multiple pages, generate. Boom. Okay. So now we have our diagram, and that's basically everything we did there. We see lightsm.draw.io right there, perfect. And now if you were just following along on your own, if you click on this site here, there's a bunch of helpful tips, but we're gonna kind of walk through the important ones in this video anyway, so we're gonna skip over this, and we will touch on the important common mistake when we get to it, because we're doing a video, we'll do it when it makes sense. Okay, so we are going to open up the diagram here in draw.io, and now I just have it opening up on the other screen, so I'll bring it over here. And yeah, okay, so here's our diagram. We're going to delete the stuff that we don't care about. This just comes straight from the template. So don't need this, don't need this, don't need this. Here's what we're starting with. And like we said, we've got the 3 pages down at the bottom. Let's flip back to our tutorial here. I'm going to close the terminal. And yeah, let's follow along. So the first thing we want to do is replace the config toml settings with this. So we don't actually, oops, didn't mean to double click there. Just need to select this without double clicking. It's not the end of the world if we left it as is, but right now the minimal config one has a count variable, and we don't want that right now. So instead of having all this stuff in here, we're just going to get rid of all of it and basically just have the equivalent of this, but as a one-liner, just saying we want the transpiler to be JavaScript. So boom. Now you see it's got some color formatting in there. If we wanted to keep that color formatting, we could by clicking on text and saying that this is formatted text. In general, though, sometimes that messes things up with draw.io, so if you don't need color, your life will be simpler without it. Okay, so we'll save that, head back over to here, and oops, in my haste, I rushed over a little bit. We want to modify the design to look like this. So we're going to change the first state to be off, the next one to be on, and we'll come back after that. So back to the design. So we're going to say this is off. This is our on state here. Now, personal preference for me is I tend to like I'll hold shift to select both of these. I prefer the Lucida console font, and I like it to be size 12. Now I want that to be the default, because if I just draw another arrow out here and hit F2 to start typing, this has the Helvetica font again. I want it to be what I want, so I'm going to right click on it and set as default style. So now when I do a couple other things here too, now when I type, I get the font that I want at the size that I want. So setting the default is handy. Okay, so if we flip back over again, we want enter to call the global function off and on to call the global function blue laser. Here we'll just go ahead and make those changes. Yeah, I'll redo that. To edit this text, you can either click on it once, hit F2, or you can double click into it. Double clicking into it usually works well. So there we call our global function off. Here we're going to go call our global function blue laser. And now to transition from off to on, I'm going to hit F2. We wanted that to happen on the inc event, and F2 again. We wanted this to happen on the dim event. I'm going to squeeze those up a little bit, and also I can shrink this one, and just tuck them up a bit. We'll click save. Let's go back and take a look at our diagram. This all looks good now. We've got our inc, our dim, and our two function calls. So we'll follow along. We'll open up our terminal again, and let's go ss.cli run -h. That's the short option of -- here. Okay, we have generated our the simulator, which we talked about last time, which we don't need right now, and our JavaScript file. So if everything went properly, here I'll just full screen this, F5. Okay, things look good so far. This page has a bit of intelligence to it, so that it works at the different stages of us creating it. So it's not sending the different events and stuff. And if you try to send the off event, it detects it right now, saying, hey, your state machine doesn't have an event handler for the off button yet. We'll get to that in like a couple minutes in this tutorial. But anyway, so we send the inc event, we get to on one stage. We can see, oh, you know what? I forgot to call it on one. I just called it on. So we'll go back and change that in a second. Sending more inc events doesn't do anything. Sending the dim event sends us back to off. So that is functioning properly. But let's go ahead and rename this to what we wanted. On one. We'll head back to here. Yeah, so now that matches. Okay, so far so good. We interacted with the state machine. We saw that it worked properly. So now we're going to add another state. And if you wanted to, it wouldn't hurt to pause the video here and see if you can follow this small little challenge here. We want another state on 2. When we enter that state, it should call the function yellow laser, and it should transition to on 1 when the dim event is received, and it should transition from on 1 to on 2. Oh, sorry, and additionally, we should add transition from on 1 to on 2 when the inc event is received. So basically taking this pattern here and just extending it to another state. So if you want to, go ahead and pause that. If you don't, that's cool. We'll do it now. All right, so I'm going to right click and drag, or middle click and drag just to move the canvas up. So I'm going, there's actually a lot of different ways we could do this. Draw.io is pretty impressive. We could copy paste, we could hold Control and Shift to clone it. We could use the arrow to do a clone like this. Many different ways we can do this. I'm going to go with this for now. So here's our inc event. We're going to go with our dim event here. And we'll change this. I'm going to double click right on the text here to on 2. This function we're going to call yellow laser. And I'll snug that up again here. Make it kind of consistent there. As state machines get larger, I sometimes have the preference of wanting the event triggers to be closer to the owning state here. So something like that. This event behavior oops, I could get even closer if I wanted to change this. This is actually a pretty good tip to talk about right now. Right now we have snapping enabled, which sometimes is good, sometimes is annoying. If I want to turn off the snapping, I can hold Alt while I'm trying to move this around. So I start moving, and now if I hold Alt, I can put it anywhere. So kind of like in between things. Anyway, so yeah, one of my preferences is generally to have the events be closer to the state. So I'll start moving this, hold Alt, and then I can just move it where I want. I find this a little bit easier to think about sometimes because, this ink event belongs to this state. When we have them split in the middle here, it's not bad or anything, but it visually takes a little bit more processing time in your brain to remember that this ink event does not have to do with this on event. So yeah, I tend to prefer this. Okay, so we've got our on one and our on two. We'll save and pick back up where we left off. So yeah, this is what we were trying to do, and we done it. So things are good. We'll just quickly, we can just up arrow. We'll run our code generation again. We'll refresh our page here, and now we should see blue, and we should get to yellow. Adding more yellow doesn't do anything, or more inks doesn't do anything, and then dim, dim. All right, we're trucking along. Okay, now things are going to get a little bit more interesting. We're going to add another state, so we're going to add an on3 state. But for this, we want it, maybe I'll scroll back up again for a second. To get to this new red laser on3 state, we want the user to have to press the ink button 3 times while they're in the on2 state. So there's a bunch of different ways we could do this. This is just one of the ways. So let's jump into it. So first thing we'll do is we'll wire up our on3 state. So on3, the standard ink and dim events, our enter and red laser. So let's jump over to here, and I'm going to copy it like this. And I'll just go copy, click paste here. Now there's an important thing to know about draw.io too. We actually, if we try to code generate like this, we're going to have a problem. And that's because this edge here isn't terminated to that shape. So see how this is attached? If I grab this one here, those arrows are not attached. So we'll just do the code generation to show some of the errors that you could bump into. I'm going to increase the font size over here. So we run our code generation now. It is going to give us a proper error. And it's going to say, failed while trying to read diagram for settings. That's basically just saying, while it was reading the diagram, it encountered a problem. We actually read the diagram twice. Once to get the settings, because you can embed those toml settings in the diagram. And then once to do the code generation. So here it says, draw.io exception, edge/arrow is not connected at the source. And, there's the diagram ID if you wanted to search for it. And there's the label. So edge source, you need to connect this. And it's actually quite nice too. It's saying the target. So we have something that maybe looks connected in the diagram, but isn't at the source. And it has the label ink, and it's going to the on2 state. So that is clearly this one here. So all we're going to do is drag it down and see how it's connected there. So now when I click on it, I see that it's got a green anchor kind of on both spots there. We'll do that to this side too. There we go. We'll save. We'll run our code generation again. Oops. Oh, yeah, another good proper exception. It's saying there's a state. So the root state has multiple children with the same name on2. I'd like to pretend that I'm doing this on purpose, but I'm just being a little bit silly here, I guess. Not being careful enough. Okay. So, right. Now we've got our properly named state, and we should go ahead and change this to red laser. Now we're going to go back and run our code generation. So we're going to say ss.cli run here, and we should see that it is error-free. Okay, things are good. We can move on to the next part. So now the next part is, because remember we want to transition from on2 to on3 when the ink event has been pressed 3 times. while already in the on2 state. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a state machine variable. So we're going to copy that. We're going to go ahead and add that to our config toml. So click down on the config here, double click. Oh, I actually have to double click kind of in this blue box here. So double click there, hit enter a couple times, paste it in. And here it got rid of our indentation. We could leave it like this, that is valid. I kind of like to add the indentation, personal preference. You can do it whatever you like. And we'll save. All right, now let's see here. Yeah, so there's an important note about this auto expanded var section. Yeah, so we're using this string looks a little different than the single quoted string. This is like many languages that have multi-line strings. Basically, we could add a whole bunch of variables in here if we wanted to, add different white space, whatever. But the other important note here is that this declaration syntax is programming language specific. So this is what you'll use when you use JavaScript. But if you're using C or C++ or any other language, basically, you would use the syntax appropriate for your language here. And one of the later lessons is programming language specific, and you'll see like different examples of that. Okay, so yeah, let's keep trucking here. We're going to add this behavior here, enter and reset the count variable to 0 inside of on2. So we'll head back over to design. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Now, if I want to, I could put enter down here, or I could put enter above. Either one is fine. Okay, so we've got our count being zeroed when we enter on2. And now what we want to do is we also want to increment the count variable when we're in the on2 state and we get the inc event. So same thing. We'll head down into here. So here's our trigger. In this case, the trigger is an event. These triggers here are like enter and exit triggers. Maybe I'll take a quick second to just talk about that. A trigger is a generic name for something that triggers something. So enter is not an event, it's a trigger. Inc is an event, and all events are triggers, just in case you care about that or you see something related to what's the difference between a trigger and a behavior, or sorry, what's the difference between a trigger and an event. That's kind of the explanation there. So here we're going to say count plus plus. If we were in Python, we couldn't do this. Or those semicolons, you would do something like this instead in Python. But because we're generating for JavaScript, we can just use that kind of common syntax. I'm going to yank this one down a little bit just to give some space between those. And let's pick back up with the tutorial. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. Or it's all interesting, but this is a new aspect. So we want it to only transition from on2 to on3 when the inc event happens and count is already at or greater than 3. The greater than is just to be cautious. So we're going to double click on here, or we could click on it once and hit F2. And we're going to give these square brackets. And this is our guard condition. This is basically like the if condition. So we're going to say if count is greater than equal to 3. And I'm going to drag this for a little bit here, just to, not have it go too far out to the side. So things are looking good. When we're in the on2 state, we increment the count when we get inc. And when we get the inc event and our count is greater than equal to 3, we'll transition to on3. But there's a little bit of ambiguity here. Which of these behaviors happens first? If we get the inc event, do we check for this transition first? Or do we do this behavior, increment count, and then check for the transition first? In the UML specification, it has no way of describing this. It just says, draw your diagram so that there's no ambiguity possible. And sometimes that's a real big pain in the butt. And so to get around that, we just add a small little extension here. So here's the text for that, basically what I already said. we're going to add an ordering to our behavior here. So we're just going to put a 1 dot in front of it. So we want, in this case, this behavior to happen before this one here. Now we could add a 2 dot here to be extra explicit, but we don't need to. If it doesn't have an order, it runs after everything that's ordered. So this order here is like 1, and the implicit order of this one is something like 10 million or 100 million or something like that. So this one's going to execute after that one. If you accidentally put the 1 in the wrong place, like if you put it I guess on the other side of the event here or trigger, you'll get you'll generate code that doesn't make sense, and then your compiler will catch this. Sometimes statesmith will also catch it. We can do a quick demo here. So if you put the 1 here, statesmith should detect that that is garbage syntax. Yeah, so here it says mismatched 1 at line 4, column 4, offending symbol. So yeah, it's saying this is not great. It's got some related help here. But if you put the 1 over here in the action code, because statesmith parses for multiple different languages, it has to be a bit loose with how it handles the parsing here. So it's going to generate the code. And it's going to generate the code and not detect that there is an issue until you look at your JavaScript file. And if we look at our JavaScript file, down here, statesmith has generated exactly what we asked it to do. But in this case, we asked it to do something stupid. So yeah, that's all that little example is doing there. We'll put our ordering back in the correct place. We'll close the generated state machine, and let's keep going. Okay, so we'll check our work. Everything looks good. We'll generate the code and head back to our state machine here, or the place where we can exercise it. So right now the simulation has detected that we've got a count variable now. So we'll send the inc once to get to on1, send it again to get on2. Now we're in on2. When we send this inc event, we shouldn't transition, but we should see the inc affect the count. So there it goes up by 1, up by 2, and on this last one, it's going to increase the count and then transition to on 3, and it should go red. Boom, there we go. Everything is working exactly like we wanted it to. All right, this video, I've enjoyed making it. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, but we're getting a little bit on the long side now, so I'll break the video here, and we'll do a next session where we talk about pulling a timeout transition and kind of finishing up this example before we head on to lesson 3.